Allison here at the Bored Housewife. Thank you so much for joining me for another week's episode of the Bored Housewife. For those of you who have been following this whole time, I can't believe I've almost been doing this for a year. What started out as just some funny life anecdotes has turned into something so much more for me, and I hope it's turned into so much more for you guys as well. I wanted to just kind of, I think, relate to people, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And for those of you that have been following from the beginning, and those of you that might be newer listeners, if you go back to the old episodes, they are very much me just telling kind of funny life stories, useless nonsense that I have in my head, and I just felt like sharing it with people. But what I realized as I started making this podcast was that the stories that seem to, be more relatable and have some more serious undertones to them started to inspire more discussion, whether it was some comments on my posts or, personal messages that were sent to me. And I started kind of looking around and just noticing trying to build my own social media presence just to try to get more followers and, relate in another way outside of the podcast. Because what I learned and what I've talked about in some of my earlier episodes, making a podcast these days isn't just so much as what I'm doing here now, recording myself and, getting the video and all of that, which I was totally on board for. What I realized is, how are you going to let people know that you have a podcast? And so I, went to social media, and I was trying to not only be inspired by for myself, but just getting ideas of things to do. And there's just so much bullshit regurgitated on social media, and all these people trying to help make your life better and give you these tips and tricks. And, all of that can be helpful at certain times, but what is that really doing to improve your life? If you are just looking to get some cleaning tips, sure, go on cleaning TikTok and you'll get a whole bunch of really interesting videos of people scrubbing their toilet, and that's cool, okay? But there's not as much stuff that is what I'm doing, at least what I've noticed, where we're taking these philosophical ideas and talking about them. And so where this podcast has gone, if you stayed with me this whole time, thank you so much. I will continue to be so grateful for you guys that have been following and listening and watching my podcast and continue to. And I guess for this next year, I just want to continue to get more into that while keeping things, lighthearted, keeping things interesting, talking about some tough concepts and maybe ideas that are new to you and maybe even new to me as well, and just kind of working through all of this together. So, yeah, and it's been helpful for me because I needed this as well. I started the podcast because I obviously was looking for something that I needed to reach out and connect to people. And then in doing so, I started picking up my philosophy books again. And that was when I was I think other people would really benefit from this. But, philosophy has such a stigma around it as being this really heady, smart intellectual person thing. And, maybe for a majority of philosophers out there, that's what it is. If that's the case, then what is that all about? Because I think that everybody deserves an opportunity to examine their lives and to try to figure out, what their happiness is, what is happiness exactly, and get to that. Because, we only have so much time on this earth, and what we do with it is really important. And yeah, so we're going to continue to examine our lives because that will never end. And we're going to just continue to do that. I'm really excited to introduce some new philosophers to you guys this year, and maybe, learn some new stuff myself and just be reminded. And it's a lot of this stuff too, you can read the same philosopher over and over again and learn something different every time. Or, as this is going to sound super cliche, I think I heard this on How I Met Your Mother. But as we continue to change, things are different for us, and we start to interpret things differently as we have more life experiences and get older, and that's what it's all about. So, went from talking about funny shit I did in my 20s to today we are going to talk about this guy Plato and his good friend Socrates that he really likes to write about a lot. So please don't turn me off. I promise I'm going to keep it interesting. I'm not going to go into like a crazy in-depth theory study class about this, okay? Like I said, this is casual philosophy. This is not, let's, figure out the world's problems in one episode. I just think it's really important that if we're going to do this, we do it right. And why not start with the guy who a lot of people credit to inspiring Western philosophy. I think it's great. So, anyways, I'm drinking water and I'm going to get into that in just a minute. But cheers, guys. Let's have some fun. So I don't have a cocktail for you guys this week. This podcast is on an evolution. As I was talking about in the introduction, so much has changed since we started this. I still love cocktails. I still love wine. I still love alcohol. It's great, right? As I've explained in some of my past episodes, I do have my cocktail stuff now. It's just there is a no tolerance for alcohol in drinking and driving in Japan. And again, I agree with all these things. I'm not complaining about it. But even to just have like one drink or just even a few sips while I'm making the podcast, if I have other stuff to do later in the day, makes it really difficult to go and do those things. So I haven't quite figured out. I don't want to necessarily get rid of the cocktail segment. I don't think it's going to be a part of the regular podcast anymore. I think that it might just be a side thing that I do on social media. I'm thinking about maybe like creating a link on the page to go to the cocktail of the week or something like that. I would really like to incorporate like more of a blog post aspect to this as well. So all of that is to come. I am still figuring out so much, guys, and I apologize that it's taking me so long, but it's a big adjustment, and that I can't be sorry for. So I wish it would go a lot faster, but I have just needed to take my time with this, and I hope you guys don't mind. I mean, even this right now, it's so boring what's going on behind me. I ordered this cool little thing to hang on the wall, so we'll see what it looks like when it gets here. But yeah, I'm trying, guys, so hang tight with me, and hopefully within the next few months, this will feel like we got a good flow going on. Anyways, so Plato, right? I wanted to talk about this because a lot of people credit him to inspiring most of our modern day philosophy, Western philosophy. And Plato was, I'm going to look at my notes a lot because I don't want to mess this up, especially because, I am not an expert on Plato. There are so many historians and people who study these guys. There are so many contradictory sort of statements out there about them. So, what they are, this is just kind of my interpretation on a very basic level. And again, I don't want to, bore you guys to death. So it's not like we're going to go in, super in depth, because the main reason of me talking to you about them is what they really stand for and what it is, and we're going to get into all of that. So, some people would think that I have no business talking about Plato and philosophy this way, and to them, whatever. I can talk about whatever I want because I have a podcast, and there we go. So, anyways, so Plato was technically a student of Socrates. Socrates is mentioned a lot in Plato's writings. So for today, and this is what kind of inspired it, I got into my philosophy books from college. And these are Plato's 5 dialogues. There's more than this. But especially in these, this is like the trial and execution of Socrates. And this is like Plato's interpretation of what happened, but he writes in dialogue. And so, a lot of people have kind of like taken that he's like writing verbatim, like this is what Socrates said. A lot of people suggest that Plato was more so inspired by Socrates and his teachings of philosophy, and that's he's using Socrates more so as a character, and then also kind of using like his life events and maybe some actual moments as like part of Plato's philosophy. But the main thing that I kind of found when I was Googling it was that Plato had his own philosophy that was inspired by Socrates. Socrates, during that time, he didn't like write anything down. There are these people called sophists, and they were kind of like these traveling teachers in Athens. Plato kind of talks about these sophists as if they're separate from Socrates. Socrates also did a very similar thing. They would go down to like the gym and like speak to young men and, teach them about math and art and public speaking and all these like different things. And they became like very coveted. Like people would pay these guys to like teach their kids because it was very important, like what they were learning to as they like became citizens, and kind of just like what we do today. Like we go to school today, our kids go to school so that they can have certain skills, right? So people kind of like suggested that Socrates was like that, but what Socrates and Plato kind of considered some of these sophists were not very truthful people. So they would go around and they would say things, and they would say them as if they're like absolute truths, and sometimes they would lie. And so a lot of times sophists and politicians are sometimes compared as like the same sort of thing, where you have these people who are speaking of these ideals and these things, and they speak about them as absolute truths. But, there's, according to Plato and Socrates, there's not always this absolute truth, and life is about an examination. So Socrates more so would go up to these, youths, and he would ask like really random questions like, what is happiness? What is the meaning of life? He would just ask these like really broad questions, and then they would have a conversation about it. And so I think that's where Plato was really inspired by Socrates to write in that way, his philosophy, because you really get to kind of get this back and forth. And I guess, Plato didn't really agree with writing as well. But he did write down, and, thankfully he did, because we have the teachings today. But, for him, it was more about a discussion, and it was about the dialogue going on. And so that's why a lot of his writings are in this dialogue form, because then you can at least kind of get the sense of a feeling of a back and forth conversation, even though, like, for both of them, their, preference would be that you're having these conversations in person with someone. So what they did is they like asked moral and ethical questions, and they kind of established this thing called metaphysics, which is the connection between the mind and the body. And so this is what really inspired a lot of the Western philosophers, because you have this like tangible thing, your body, and then you have this other thing up here that's your mind, and that's really just the basic gist of metaphysics. Even today, I guess, when some of the things that I found online, metaphysics isn't held to the same degree as it used to, because we've found so much, like, science has kind of taken over some aspects of that. But, these ideas of these, like, big questions and stuff are still there. And, these ethical and moral issues that we come across, and, like, just the different sort of things that, we're talking about on this episode, and just our like desire to find our happiness or whatever. And so I wanted to mention these guys because it is 2022 and Plato and Socrates were both ancient Greek philosophers. I have Socrates died roughly around 348 BC. And somehow these writings are still relatable today. So I think it just kind of goes to show that, like, some of these things aren't answerable. A lot of this stuff is based on the individual. So, from your perspective, what we're talking about, what sort of ideas that, I might be talking about on the podcast that day, these are things that are all internal and, based on the things that you've experienced in your life and how you're going to interpret them. And so, I think that's really interesting that, like, all of those thousands of years ago, we're still dealing with the same type of issues. And so these issues aren't just like, how to solve a problem. These issues are perplexing to all of humans. And the point of it is like, it's never going to be definitive, right? You're never, like, a lot of what we talk about on here is so that you can use philosophy in your daily lives. And that's to help sort out certain issues, right? That's so it's to help us kind of figure out, like, what we want to do with our time here. And I think that, to have an understanding that, like, it's never going to be definitive. This is a lifelong pursuit, and to kind of, like, drive that home is important. Because, like I said about these people before that are kind of like sophists in a way, if we want to go there. They get on their high horse and they tell you how to live your life in the self-help books, and they try to sell you some answer to everything, or people try to tell you all these different ways to be happy and to find happiness. And the reality of it is it's just bullshit. Happiness is about a pursuit for happiness, and constantly examining our life and where we're at. And so the fact that they were talking about this all the way back in ancient Greek and we're still talking about the same sort of ideas today, maybe just a little differently here and there, and maybe the names are a little easier to say because some of these names are like, let's see here. Well, we have Socrates. I don't know. Meno. Let's see, who else? Anytus. You get my point, right? So, some of these names are hard to say. So, the fact that we can, like, still relate to these guys and can't even pronounce their names correctly, I think is pretty interesting and says something about, this quest that all humans seem to be on, whether we realize it or not. We we continue to read these books. We continue to look for meaning and do different things in our lives. Someone could give you every single answer, and I think this is also kind of another interesting point. Like, someone could literally give you the roadmap to the happiest life ever. We hear our elders talk about, like, what makes you, like, what's the meaning of life? What's the secret to life longevity? Like, all these things. And until you experience it really for yourself and you have this journey on your own, like, someone can tell you what to do and you still not understand what it is. You have to live and examine life. And that's what Socrates and Plato really wanted to drive home, is that asking these certain questions, having these, ethical conversations with people about what's right and wrong, and just, like, the differences of, like, different scenarios and stuff can help us figure out what that is. And they also, which I find really kind of interesting, is they were, I don't want to say mocking, but they just kind of felt like at the time Athens was very superficial and people were really into things that weren't important. And again, here we are, thousands of years later, and what do we see all over social media? What do we see on the television? What are the sorts of things that like we worship in life, And I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about like celebrities and sports teams and, different little things that we think are so cool and we give so much meaning to, and for what. And so I think it's just like this next year, especially, we're going to get into so much more of just like being a person who's constantly examining ourselves and questioning things. And I think that that's even more important right now because there's so much going on in our world. And not that there hasn't always been, but it just feels like there's certain things that you can't say or do, and people are so uncomfortable around each other. And I think like this podcast is really kind of unique in that way because I just want to help you guys try to open your minds a little bit and have more of these, like ask these questions, like, and be able to, like, for us to have like respectful conversations around something. Because the thing is like, Plato believed in discussions and he believed in, people having these conversations because what might seem black and white might not actually be black and white. And one thing that I had written down is, people talk in these like absolute truths, like, oh, this is the way it is and it can't be any other way. And maybe like 90% of the time you see it that way, but maybe 10% of the time it's okay. And that's why like we have these conversations. So like one of the questions I thought about, and it's super blatant, is it okay to kill people? Is it okay to kill someone? And I would say probably majority of the time most of us would assume no, it's not okay to kill someone. But is it okay to kill someone if they're trying to hurt you? Is it okay to kill someone, in another scenario? And so that's why it's important to have kind of some different conversations and hear different perspectives because, 90% of the time we might say like, no, it's not it's not okay to kill somebody. Or for specific reasons, it's not okay to kill someone. But is it okay to kill someone if you're at war? Some people might say yes, some people might say no. Is it okay to kill someone if they're trying to hurt you? Some people might say yes, some people might say no. And our different perspectives are going to have answers on that. And what's important is to realize that, it's not right or wrong. There's certain areas where within our law, like, you can't just go kill someone because they took your girlfriend, okay? Like,
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh, come on, Siri. But, like, the law might look at it another way if it's, like, a crime of passion or something. People have gotten away with murder or have gotten shorter sentences for this. So, our law has taken these ethical scenarios into consideration as well. And so that's why we have these conversations, these ethical and moral conversations, and why we need to stay open-minded to things. And I just really want to kind of promote that on here because, again, it just feels so much like people are either this or that. And nope, I don't even want to hear any counter argument. I made up my mind. And what I think is interesting is sometimes when we decide to be open-minded and have these conversations with people and live and examine life, you might learn something that you had never thought of before. Great example, Cliff and I, we've been going out a lot, and living in Japan, sometimes it feels like very patriarchal here. And I'm not trying to like be super feminist or anything like that. Just as an American woman, sometimes it feels like, I'm not included as much, especially when I'm out with Cliff. And I was talking to Cliff about this. And also a friend of mine, too, she had mentioned when they lived here, there's this sake that has a habu snake in it. And it's really weird looking. There's like a live snake in the sake. I will have to get some to show you guys sometime. It's super creepy, but it's like, I've never tried it. I'm scared to try it. But she was asking me if I tried it yet. And I was like, no, did you try it? And she was like, no, a guy offered to like buy the bar that we were at a round of shots. And then I didn't get one because I was a woman. So only the guys in the bar were able to get the shots. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay. And so that was kind of started like me thinking like, yeah, sometimes it does feel kind of like get in your place, woman. And so I was explaining this to my husband, and then my husband said to me, he's like, I don't think it's so much that. I think it's actually a respect thing. Like, I'm not going to buy your wife a shot because I'm respecting your marriage. I'm not talking to your wife, I'm talking to you because I'm a man and I don't want to overstep a boundary of respect that is your marriage or your situation. And as I kind of thought about that, I'm like, they are a society that is very kind and very like into manners and tradition. And even though it feels kind of patriarchal at times, and not that there couldn't be some of that there, but it's just very different to what we do in America. And our cultures are obviously different. But to think of it more as like a sign of respect versus like, you're a woman, get back in line. Get back in line, bitch. I think is a much better way to think about it, and could honestly be the truth of the situation. So by me having that conversation with my husband and hearing him out and being open-minded enough to realize like, yeah, maybe this isn't some Japanese guy just being a jerk stuck in his way. Maybe he is actually just being respectful to what we have as a couple. And if, I were here by myself or with, other girlfriends, they would treat me just fine, but they don't have to worry about, in that scenario, like overstepping any boundaries or anything. So I think that's another reason just why I really want to continue with this podcast. And I hope you guys are still enjoying this, because not only is it about self-improvement and examining ourselves to find what happiness is, find, the things that we can do in our life, being okay with change, being open to change, being open to all sorts of different things, but also being open-minded to each other and understanding that all of us are coming from different perspectives. All of us are coming from different scenarios that are shaping our judgments. And the more open-minded we can be about things, I think the more the better our society would be as far as understanding and compromising and, overall being happier with the way things are. Okay, guys, just keeping this episode kind of shorter again this week. I'm not sure if I'm going to have an episode next week or the following week, so stay tuned. I'm trying really hard to get back on track to put one out every single week. Especially if I keep them a little bit shorter. I think that would be a little bit easier for me and easier for you guys to keep up with. So we will see. I can't promise anything. I feel like sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to keep it short. And then I'm like, blah, 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 blah. Anyways. But yeah, so moral of the story is, moral of this episode is that the people who really has inspired our Western way of thinking and philosophy and so much of what we are used to, I guess, I don't know, so much of what we live our lives by, just the different rules and our morals and ethics, what all those things are built on, come from this time period in ancient Greece where you had these philosophers walking around, talking to people. You have these, they call them, they're kind of like charlatans, people who talked big, talked a big game, very similar to our politicians and people today, and just kind of would say anything and could get away with it. They didn't have fact checkers back then. So they could kind of say anything was true, then unless somebody could literally come out and be like, no, you're a liar, they got away with that sort of stuff. So I think that it's really cool that we find these similarities in history because not that, we're not that we're like still dealing with the same issues, but just the fact that like a lot of this is just humans, and it kind of just starts over with every single human, right? Because again, like I was saying, it's about your self-examination and your examine life, and only you can figure that out, and only you can come to that realization on your own that this is something that you want and need to do. You can live in a delusional la la land and, you know, get all the self help tips, books, movies, groups, whatever, and just continue to kind of live under delusion, I guess, and not ever really get to the core issue of what you're really trying to figure out. Or you can ask yourself these hard questions. You can be open minded and risk, your morals and ethics being challenged, but in the process, might find something even better to believe in, or might even just think to yourself, like, wow, I'm now even more confident in where I stand because I heard that argument, and I still feel like my argument is the better one in this scenario, or at least is better for me. And when saying that, you can still respect that people have a different opinion than you. So I think it's just, us continuing to talk about this stuff. Again, like, Plato and Socrates, they encourage discussion and dialogue. And so as you, might pick some of this stuff up and read it, sometime of this year, I would love to get to a point where I can, get letters, like emails from you guys, or if there's anybody out there that wants to try to talk philosophy during a podcast, that would be super fun. And so I'm open to all of these things, pending me figuring out how to figure out the technology to record them. If it's like a conversation, I see other people do it. I don't think it'd be too hard for me to figure out, but yeah, I'm just excited for, the new stuff that's to come, and I hope you guys are still interested in it. I know it can be kind of dry sometimes, but it is super important that, we're having these conversations. And like I said, like, just my little example of that conversation with my husband, like, it totally, took me out of this little negative place that I was sitting in with it and feeling bad about it, and then realizing, like, actually it might be so much more beautiful than like what I thought. And it's something so simple, but it's just those little things that change our mind and help us understand the world a little bit better and the people around us. And I think that's just really what it's all about. It's about better understanding, better empathy, and even if you don't agree, to have respect for people who think differently than us and have different ideas. So please like, subscribe, comment, email. Let me know what you guys think. I'm going to put this up. It's called Plato, the 5 Dialogues. I also have Plato, the Complete Works. He has a lot of writings if you guys are interested in it. It is a little difficult to read. Not impossible. Just, I have to take my time when I read it just because of how, even though it's in English and it's been translated, it's still kind of like a little weird to read. But I also wanted to real quick throw out here Mark Manson's other book. I know I've talked about the first one. This is his second book that he's read, Everything is Fucked, a book about hope. And this has been making me think a lot. I wouldn't consider this a self-help book, but I guess in maybe a little bit kind of way it is. He really connects philosophy with psychology and like the reasons behind why people do things and think certain ways, which I think complement each other really well. And so I'm not going to get into his book the same way I do other ones, because then I feel like I'm just taking, his book and like preaching it. And I think it would be much better if you guys just read it on your own and kind of came to your own conclusion. If anybody does decide to read this and we want to do like a discussion on it, let me know. I'd be totally open to that because I think that would be a lot more beneficial than like me just telling you what his book is about when, there's just a lot of different ideas and stuff in here, and they're his ideas. And so, even though like we can talk about like these other philosophers and stuff, like this is a guy who is alive today, and it's not so much of a philosophy that he's talking about, and so that's why it's kind of a little bit different. But I think the book is really cool, and for some of you that might be, needing help on like just getting to this open-mindedness or kind of figuring some stuff out. I think he's really cool, and I'm pretty sure I think he also has a blog. I don't follow it, but maybe I'll start following it. Who knows? But yeah, I think he's pretty cool. He's pretty blunt, pretty straightforward, super easy to read. The ideas aren't like way out there or anything. He's funny, and so I mean you can tell by the title. He's kind of a funny guy. So anyways, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Again, please like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, look at the books that I'm posting on my Linktree page. And yeah, I will see you guys soon. Bye.